Well, basically, the fundamental problem is that today no one is in control of the money. So central banks are supposed to exert control over the stock of money, but the fact today is that actually 90 to almost 99%, depending on the country, of the entire money supply is created by the banks, by the banking sector on the whole. And central banks, in actual fact, have no more control over it. And so, and the reason is that there is literally no more central bank money in public circulation. The traditional means of payment, central bank means of payment in circulation, has been, in the recent 1-2 centuries, that has been cash, coins and notes, but that's no longer of relevance for the entire money system, because today the basic form of money that is non-cash, it's money on account, and that is created by the banks largely in the form of our bank deposits, particularly sight deposits or demand deposits, however you call it, generally speaking. So the determining money supply today is bank money supply, bank deposit money. And central banks had the idea to exert some influence by way of setting interest rates, but central banks only can set interest rates on their own money, and they have no more money in circulation. And that's also the case for money on account. So you see, banks have accounts with the central bank, and the money on account there, that is called the reserves. But this too is only a very, very small fraction of the entire money supply. And so central banks actually have no more, say, a lever for implementing monetary policy. And in a way, it reminds me King Lackland. You know, King Lackland was, as the name says, it's a king without land, a king without a realm to govern. So central banks are supposed to govern the money system, but there is no more money in circulation to govern, and that's the problem today. And the result, of course, is that the money creation by the banking sector, banks themselves do not control the money supply. They cannot, because they act individually according to their own business plans and business ideas. They do not know what the other banks are doing at the same time. And normally economists tend to say, well, leave it to the market. So the supply and demand of money, that will regulate itself. And there is a point, of course. There are such mechanisms, but at the same time, what most economists actually overlook is the fact that particularly on financial markets, there is not only that negative feedback loop that limits supply and demand, but there is also a positive feedback loop that is self-propelling, you know, because, say, if there is a bonanza on the real estate market, the housing market, or the equity exchange, then most actors do not say, oh, prices are so high, we stop buying, but they say, oh, we have a bonanza, I want to be in. You know, and so that is self-propelling, and that's why in recent decades we have had, since central banks have more or less lost control of the stock of money, we have had these an increased frequency and severity of financial crisis, because we have recurrently with the financialization, we have recurrently a bubble building on the financial markets, and bubbles tend to burst. And so, well, that's the immediate problem resulting from the loss of control over the money supply. We have an increased frequency and severity of financial crises across hotspots across the world. And that, of course, directly, if a bubble bursts, so many actors become insolvent. And this has a very negative effect also on the real economy. And the usual effect of such a financial crisis also tends to be some sort of recession or even outright crisis in the real economy. And this is one problem. And the other problem is that if an increasing part of the money is created not for being invested in the real economy, for real things, for goods and services and so on, but if it's invested in, as we say, non-GDP contributing finance, which means financial investment that does by itself not contribute to real economic output, then of course an increasing part of the money created, so that is just for self-serving financial purposes, but it's nevertheless money. And when you have that money, you have purchasing power, so you have access to real economic output. And so since around 1980, when these developments really took off, there was a real downturn also in the distribution of income and wealth. And the reason is that from that time on, an increasing part of income was financial income and no longer earned income. And so the delicate balance, I would say, I don't know if it's really a balance, but they say the distribution between earned income and financial income, or say capital income, we were used to until the 1970s, 80s, that all of a sudden that changed, and we now have a strong bias towards financial income, and of course at the expense of earned income, and that creates new inequality, and people feel it's unjust. It's not justified, and so if it continues like this, we will have sooner or later we already have new social problems. There are new types of so-called social question, new people feeling no longer being included in society. And this is part of the immediate results of the so-called financialization of the entire economy. And financialization itself is not only rests on the circulation of existing money, but the bigger part of the money that is created today immediately goes into non-GDP finance. That needs to be seen, and that needs to be corrected. And in order to get things right again, we need to regain control over the money. The real economy is transacting some sort of product, be these goods or commodities or services, and so we need money to exchange the goods. So that's so-called real transactions, you know. But in a modern economy, production needs to be financed. And so entrepreneurs, but also private households, of course, think of housing. We need credit. Many things in a modern economy need to be pre-financed. So we do not save long time-saving money and then investing it in something, but the money is created in order to pre-finance economic activities. And so that's the function and the role of the financial economy. And traditionally, most economic theories start from the assumption that finance relates to the real economy, that finance is for funding or financing real economic activities. But that's no longer the case in that simple way, because in actual fact, most of the money today, depending on the country, more than half of it, 2/3, at the height of the last bubble in 07, 08, even up to 3/4 and more of newly created money, all of that went into financial activities that had no immediate relation to the real economy, but they were self-serving financial activities, mergers and acquisitions, or of course the whole derivatives market and speculation in land and commodities and so on. And that's actually the problem today, because our entire life, so to say, the real economy, that's our real life, is being superseded by financial calculations, in a way speculative calculations. And I think a society can can live with a little bit of that, yes, but not if most of it goes into non-GDP finance. That's a situation we cannot bear over time. It won't work over time. It really, most of finance really does not serve real economic activity of newly created credit, of newly created money. And yes, that's the problem. And it needs to be corrected. And as I said, in order to be able to change things, one of the fundamental preconditions is to regain control over the money. And this would include there must be a bigger amount of central bank money in the entire money supply, because the central banks, they need a lever in order to implement monetary policy. And that's it. Well, that's the challenge. And that certainly would involve, to some degree, curbing the role that bank money plays today. So the role of bank money that would have to recede to a certain extent, I would say to a big extent, and the role of central bank money will have to increase accordingly, so that central bank money can again become the determining money supply and no longer be irrelevant as it is today. Under the given conditions, more and more people today think or ask themselves, why couldn't the government, say the finance ministry, create itself the money the government needs for funding public activities? Well, the problem is that government expenditure today is very, very high. It's much too high to be funded simply by creating new money that would create inflation and asset inflation. And we cannot avoid to have to finance most of public expenditure by taxes. But nevertheless, the question arises, why can... You see, the situation is this. Basically, a sovereign state with a sovereign currency actually has the right to create its own money. But today, somehow self-contradictory, the governments are the same sort of customer to banks as are we, private households or companies, firms. We are all dependent on bank credit. And a little bit it's absurd, but the lawmakers have interdicted the government to create itself the money it needs. We all are dependent on bank money. We are dependent on bank credit. And this could, of course, be reversed to a certain degree by introducing more central bank money, which is also called sovereign money, the money of a sovereign state, of an independent sovereign state. So, to a certain degree, yes, budgets could be financed simply by money creation. But don't fall victim to illusions. It cannot be the entire public budget, because the entire public budget is much too high. But a certain percentage of it, I would say, depending on the growth rate, the economic growth rate, 1 to 2 to 3, up to 5 to 6% of the entire public budget could be, and actually ought to be financed simply by money creation. But all of the rest still will need to be funded by taxes. But today, even these 1, 2, 3, 5, 6% that could be funded by seigniorage, as the term says. Seigniorage means the gain from money creation. And I mean, that would already be progress. And but the more important part of it actually is not the possible contribution of money creation for funding public expenditure. It's important, it's very nice, it should be done. But the more important part is to regain control over the money. So in order to have some influence on the extent of the financial economy as a whole, and in this way indirectly also having some influence on where the money goes to, whether it really goes into real economic investment or whether it goes into non-GDP finance. The entire money supply today, particularly in Sweden, but similarly elsewhere too, about 90-95% or 99% is bank money, and also the rest 1%, 5%, 10% at the maximum is central bank money. And that was a process over more than 100 years. So we had a rising tide of bank money and an ebb tide of central bank money or sovereign money or state money, however you call it. And that needs to be reversed. So the share of central bank money or sovereign money that needs to become bigger again, and the share of bank money needs to retreat. And that is the overall picture, what needs to be done. And of course, this can easily be achieved, for example, in Sweden by introducing, as the Riksbank concept of the e-krona says, by introducing e-krona, electronic krona, which means a currency on account. And because cash is no longer the question, so for practical, technical and historical reasons, cash is really, the time of solid cash is over, because modern times are more, it's telematic, it's information, and it's I wouldn't say virtual currencies, but it's digital currencies. And so let's introduce digital central bank money, and let's over time expand the share of that digital currency in Sweden in form of the e-krona, and that will over time that will help very much, because if you increase the share of central bank money in the public money supply, then of course the share of bank money will go down, and people will experience the advantages of central bank money, which is because central bank money, in contrast to bank money, is safe and secure. You know, even if there is a crisis, sovereign money, central bank money, that will still exist independently of the fate of the banks. That's one very, very important advantage, because today, in a crisis, we have to save banks, not for the bank's sake, but because our money is bank money, so we are dependent on the bank money. And in order to save our money, we have to prop up the banks. And that's a bit upside down the world. It's a bit topsy-turvy, you know. And so we should make sure that the money is safe and secure, and then we no longer need to save banks. See, and that's one thing. And of course, the more the central bank would regain control over the stock of money, it could more effectively implement monetary policy and thus try to preempt severe crises. So I think crises as such can never totally be prevented or preempted, but the degree of severity of crisis that can of course be reduced, and that should be done, of course. And I mean, originally there was the idea of a monetary reform in the sense of a full sovereign money reform, which literally overnight would replace bank money with sovereign money originated by the central bank. But apparently to most experts and even to most people, when they are asked, that seems to be too radical. And so we now actually prefer the more gradual way of reform, which means let's introduce central bank digital currency over time, and then over the years things will change. The central banks are more or less independent monetary state authorities. They are the monetary authorities of a nation state or community of nation states, as is the case with the euro. And so in the first instance, it's the task of the central bank. And they have the right to do it, they can do it if they want to do it, but it would help if parliaments would accompany that process by a particular specified legislature. In my opinion, as far as I know, new legislation is actually not entirely necessary, as far as I know, but it would help. it would help in order to, how should I say, to support central bankers and encourage them to go ahead and not to be too shy or not to be too conservative and prudent. And so some political pressure will certainly help. I wouldn't say the system is broke, because the system works, but it works in the interest of a particular group of people. It works in the interest of the owners of financial assets. It works in the interest of financial capital. And from their point of view, the system isn't broke at all. The problem is that we, the people, so to say, the real economy, has no longer the advantages of it as it actually should have. And that's the problem, right? And here again, I have to say, in order to correct that, we need to fundamentally we need to regain control over the money, and then we have more influence over the distribution of funds, over the question where does newly created money go to? Will it serve real economic purposes, or will it serve non-GDP financial purposes? And that's the question, yes. And in the recent 3, 4, 5 decades, too much of the money really went into, as Keynes called it, the global casino, and not into real substantial economic activities that creates employment and income and so on. The advantage is that sovereign money or central bank money is safe and secure. And the other advantage is that central banks will, the degree of effectiveness of central bank monetary policy, that will increase. Monetary policy will be more effective. And then, of course, there is the advantage of the gain from money creation when you have the privilege to create money, as in fact it's a sovereign privilege, it's the privilege of a sovereign state. Then, of course, you can and should be the first user of the money. And that privilege, the privilege of money creation, it's called the seigniorage. That will be much bigger than it is today. I mean, already today, the central bank profit is transferred to the government, to the finance ministry. But in a sovereign money system, that gain from money creation will be considerably higher than it is the case today. Today, all the entire advantage of money creation, that's the profit of the banking sector, or it contributes to the profit of the banking sector, while in actual fact it should contribute to the public purse. And that will be the case if we have a sovereign money system. The entire advantage will go to the public, will contribute to the public purse. It will not be enough to replace taxes, but it will be a decent, considerable amount of money. And also, as a monetary system where sovereign money is more dominant and no longer bank money, that system will no longer have that inbuilt bias towards a distribution, a bias towards financial income at the expense of earned income. So there will be a more level playing field from the beginning. And the overall advantage, of course, also will be, let's say simply more stability in finance and the economy. I mean, we will continue to have sort of cycles, ups and downs in the economy. That's quite natural, but they should not be as extreme as they are or have been in the recent past. These are the advantages I can see, and actually I see no disadvantage, but simply say from a banking point of view, the disadvantage to them, of course, is they will lose what I call the bank money privilege. They will be free enterprises, able to do everything, or more or less everything they do today, but they will no longer have the privilege creating themselves the money on which they operate in doing their business with us, the public. And this will make a big difference. If you start introducing e-kronas, so the not big differences will be felt, but over time, because it depends on the amount, the extent of of e-krona in circulation, and that will take some time to have more e-krona. But the more e-krona there will be, so people will experience the advantages of it in the sense of there is more financial and economic stability. The overall level of indebtedness in society can be expected to go down a bit. It will not disappear. There will always be, because we need credit, and there will always be a certain degree of indebtedness, but the overall level of indebtedness will be lower, so less money will have to be devoted to service the debt and to pay back the debt. That is one difference. And also we can expect that a bigger part of the money and the funds and the credit will flow into real economic activities, and that will stabilize the labor market. It will offer opportunities, employment opportunities. And I think in these regards, of course, the contribution of money creation to the public purse, to the budget, it cannot replace the budget, but it's a contribution to it now. And these advantages will be felt over the years, not immediately in the first month, but over the years. I'm convinced, yes, these advantages will be felt by everybody. In the future, I guess, there will be more channels of allocating the money into the system. I mean, the money creation is the first step, but money creation as such is not already about allocation. Today, yes, because today it's the banks that create the money, and the banks, of course, allocate the money according to their own business ideas, and these are very peculiar ideas. Depending on the banks, the type of bank, of course, and depending on the so-called business model of the banks. But most banks, of course, are they do not like to fund, for example, small and medium-sized business, or only to a small degree, because they prefer the big business, so to say. And so you have already today a certain bias in the allocation of newly created funds, newly created credit. And in a sovereign money system, or in a system dominated by sovereign money, that can and ought to be different, in that most of that money is not brought into circulation by way of bank credit, but by way of public expenditure. And that will already make a big difference, that the first uses of money, you can prevent that the first uses of money directly go into non-GDP finance. You can make sure by transferring that money to the finance ministry, so-called genuine seigniorage. So the original gain from money creation, that can be transferred and ought to be transferred to the public purse, and it will serve public expenditure. And most of the public expenditure, in the first instance at least, goes into real economic activity. And that will already make some difference. And over time, what is actually more important, but a bit more complicated to understand, that is that today, as I said, today, most of newly created money immediately went into non-GDP finance. And of course, I mean, we cannot prevent, in a free economy, in a free market economy, we cannot and should not prevent money to be invested for financial investments rather than real economic investments. But today, as money can be so easily created immediately for financial purposes, it is created, and then there are some sort of self-fulfilling prophecies on financial markets. Actors expect if there is a boom, they expect it to continue, and they take leverage, they take up money, newly created money, in order to fuel that boom, and so on. And that will no longer be possible, because at the source, banks will no longer be able to create that much money just for fueling financial booms. And so, say there will be a more level playing field in the competition of in the competition for funds between the financial and the real economy, today there is no level playing field. All the advantages are with finance. And the real economy, but in a sovereign money system, so it's not clear from the beginning. So and I guess then that there will be a more level playing field, and then more of the funds will directly go into the real economy, and much less funds will go into financial activities as such. There would be less budget restraints. So today you very often hear saying, we don't have the money, we don't have the means, and then to a degree more funds would be available. And of course, where these funds would end up, we don't know. That's partly a question of politics of the day. Where, for example, say, a government decides where to spend how much money, but it's even the question whether or not newly created money going to the public coffers, in which way it will be spent, whether it will be spent at all. You might also use the newly created money for replacing taxes to a degree, so the taxes would go down. In a way that would be an advantage, particularly to private households too. But the government can also keep the money and decide to spend it on this or that. And another perspective is, and many people like that idea, newly created money could be used for funding a public dividend, a citizen's dividend. That means that the money, the newly created money, does not go to the public budget, but it directly goes to the people, to the private households, as a citizen's dividend. That is, the stock of newly created money is divided among the population. Many people like that idea, me too. And so you see there are various options in which sovereign money can be used. And I think we can leave these questions open. We should not decide in advance. The important thing is to regain control of the stock of money, to be able to create that stock of money, and no longer letting the banks create that money. So the central bank should create the money, and then of course it's always nice to think about what we would do with money if we had it. Yeah, if you already have the mortgage, you will not care about it much. But the problem is, in recent decades, we have experienced a strong rise in house prices. And so also the private households are very much indebted because the prices of houses have become so high. And what was the reason for it? It was the financialization of the economy, because the interest rates came down and capital owners, people having money, they're desperately and still are desperately looking for opportunities to invest. And that caused the bubble in housing markets as well as the bubble in equity and in the stock exchanges. And so in a sovereign money system, as you will not have direct immediate money creation for finance, so that effect will no longer occur to such a degree. But if you are sitting on debt today, you will not profit from it. Say, for example, I live in Germany, and in Berlin, and in Berlin you can really feel that new social segregation. In Germany overall, not necessarily, but within the European Union overall, particularly within the countries of the Euro system, for example in Greece and in Italy and Portugal and so on, those financial problems have really created much havoc. And so in Sweden you have been actually a bit shielded from it for now. And in America as well, people in America, there were so many foreclosures when the crisis hit in 07, 08. So many people actually lost their homes. you know. And I guess in Sweden you need not to be too much afraid of some such thing, but it actually happens across the world. And well, even in Sweden, I guess your mortgages, as in Switzerland, by the way, are very, very high. They could be half as high if we have had a sovereign money system, and housing and real estate had not been subject to financialization to